Hello and welcome to Manx Radio's General Election Candidate Interview Series. I'm Amy Griffiths and I'm our election producer. This September, you'll decide who gets one of the 2 seats available for each constituency in the House of Keys. And to help you make up your mind, we're inviting all the candidates to take part in a 30-minute interview. Today, we're hearing from Geoff Sutcliffe, who's standing in Arbory, Castletown and Malew. He's been speaking to Siobhán Fletcher.
So, first of all then, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you've decided to stand?
Yeah, why have I decided to stand? Because I want to make a change. I think I'm very much like everybody, a lot of people around, that I'm hearing the voices repeatedly over again. They want change, they're working hard, they're doing all the things that they were told they were supposed to do and they were going to get on in life. And they feel as if they've been left behind, they've been ignored. And for the last 10 years, I've probably been one of them loudest voices, and I've been brought up that you can't change things from the outside. So that's why I'm going to try and stand. My background is obviously with the farming side, with the outback in Douglas, and obviously the security side, and then obviously the construction. So there's a wide area, I think. And I think in one respect, that's one of my greatest strengths, because I know the day-to-day impacts in so many areas, and I try and bring similarities to all of them and then bring them back together and try and find a route forward.
You jumped forward to my next question, which was kind of about those backgrounds and where you think they would slot then into your experience if you were elected as an MHK. I suppose then the next jumping on point would be, what are your top priorities going in then?
My 3 top priorities, firstly, and I think most importantly, it's going to be to try and regain some sort of trust between the public and government, because that seems to have been very damaged over the last couple of administrations. And I don't think, thinking about it, that that's been done intentionally. I think we live in a society that everybody's scared of saying anything that can upset somebody else, or maybe say things that they're not really happy in hearing. And so many of the uncomfortable questions and uncomfortable conversations have been missed, and little bits of evidence and little bits of information have been dropped off. And then when you don't tell somebody something completely because you're trying to protect them, when you come with good news, they're not always going to believe that it is good news. So that's obviously my first one, the trust side of it. And then the second priority is, well, as everybody says, the spend with the government, and it's got to be brought back to what I would say is a sustainable level. Everybody goes on about overspend, but what is overspend? As long as it's sustainable, it's not a problem. But if it's not sustainable, then it's an issue. So the one thing that I have learned from going around speaking to people already that I was not aware of is we all go on about the overspend and the accounts from previous years, but nobody seems to be able to give us any figures of projections of income for the next 10 or 15 years. And I think that's one area that's really important to get onto, because whatever the spend is, it's determined on what we've got coming in. And until we actually know what the actual's going to be coming in, what the ideas are is going to be coming in for the next 10 years, then we can work it out. But obviously, sustainability is the main one for bringing that down to a level. And then thirdly, security, whether or not that is public security when it comes to borders, whether it's energy security, or whether it's food security. So, yeah, they're my main 3 top ones.
I suppose to jump into one of them then, in terms of food security, you've got a background in farming for a start. Food security is a massive topic of conversation. How much food do we export versus how much do we import here, and the sustainability of Manx produce. So how do you envision tackling some of those issues that you've probably come to see within that sector when it comes to food security?
Food security, it depends on who you talk to on it, because obviously food security is to one person to make sure they've got it in the fridge. Another person is to make sure that they've got the food that they want in the supermarket. And then to somebody else, it's what you're going to be putting in the field next year. So I think a lot of that food security comes down to having a plan and a strategy that's workable to start with. And the main thing is to make a system that it allows producers to produce on this island, because everybody goes on about Tesco's and all the other supermarkets that are bringing stuff in. Well, in reality, even if every producer on this island were to increase 3 times their production, we're never going to be sustainable. So we're always going to have that. But if we can make it so we are producing as much as possible, then that's fantastic. But we also need to make sure that it's sustainable for the fellas that are doing it, but also for the public that are then going to have to subsidise that cost. Because the reality is, Tesco's bring stuff in because it's cheaper, because it's produced cheaper. And I've found over the last 10 years, one of my biggest bugbears is I sit in the house, or I sit in an office, or I sit wherever I sit, and I'm talking to someone about going forward. They turn around and say, okay, these are the guidelines that you've got to adhere to for the farming regulations and things you've got to do for your production. And I say, where do they come from? They go, well, that's what the public tell us they want. That's what the customers are saying they want. But then at the same time, you go to the supermarkets, you go to the fairs, and everybody stood there with their clipboard and saying, what's important to you? You know, do you want sustainability? Do you want animal rights? Do you want environmental? Do you want traceability? Do you want all these things? But then they're not checking the trolley when they're coming out of that supermarket. And they're not checking that. They're saying, well, hang on a minute, you're saying that you want these, but all the products you bought there are the cheapest ones. And I get that, because at the same time, their main priority is feeding their family. And that's amicable. It's honourable. That's what everybody needs to do. But I think we need to sort of get some joined up thinking. And if people want cheap food, then we're going to have to go down a road that sort of allows that to happen. And it goes back to my whole point. You've got to make it possible for producers to produce, and at the moment, obviously, with the cost of inputs, is too high for us to then be realistically a good idea for Tesco's to use. So we need to try and make it more. We need to try and make it more available to Tesco's, but also we need to try and make it more. I was going to say more advantageous for them to use it.
Well, another thing that you speak about in your manifesto when it comes to the likes of Tesco, obviously other brands are available, is freight and shipping of freight on and off the island. You talk a bit about the steam packet and the costs around that, but you talk about kind of the sending of empty trailers back to the UK, because obviously these deliveries come over, and how you reading between lines, you see that as a waste, that they're going back empty. And so how would you kind of propose tackling that then?
I suppose in one respect, it's almost getting in bed with your enemy, isn't it? You know, I mean, in one moment you're saying Tesco's are the enemy and they're bringing all the food in and they're stopping the production. But then at the same time, it's almost better the devil, you know. If we can turn around and say to them, look, you know, you're sending these trailers across empty, and then if we've got this produce that you can send back, they've got more routes to market than we'll ever have. They've got facilities that that they can put it into different pies, they can put it into different foods, they can do whatever. And also, they're always going to have an outlet. So if we could then try and join forces, because it's that whole divide and conquer. It doesn't matter what area you're in. If you divide and have people arguing and fighting with each other, they're always going to have. They're going to have their own arguments, and they're going to miss the bigger picture. Whereas I think if we can then join again, that joined up thinking, if we can put the pieces, I think there's so many pieces that are there that just haven't been explored correctly, and then maybe join them up a little bit.
So there are also kind of a lot of buzzwords around election time. We keep hearing about honesty, openness and accountability. And I mean, how would you propose achieving that if you got a seat in the House of Keys?
I actually had this exact conversation about a week ago with a lady that caught me completely unawares. I'm not your average politician. I'm not sat here in a suit and tie, but the clothes I was wearing at the day were probably a lot worse than this. And suddenly she got on to me. She goes, "Well, what guarantees can you give me that if you're elected, you would do anything more than anybody else has said, and you would do the things that you say you're going to do?" And I stood there in complete horror for about 3 or 4 seconds going, I wasn't expecting this. And then as a light bulb moment, boom, it appeared. And I said to her, I'll give you exactly the same guarantee that I have given everybody else since the day I left school, because I've never worked for anybody else but myself. And every paycheck I've ever had depended on me doing exactly what I said I was going to do. And yes, things changed, and yes, there was difficulties and time delays or anything like that, but I always had to do what I said I was going to do, otherwise I didn't get paid. And anybody that's got experience working for yourselves or even in the private sector, especially in the trades, even when you do what you say you're going to do, sometimes it's difficult getting paid.
Well, so, you talk then about kind of making these difficult decisions, even when the news is uncomfortable, was kind of your quote here. Can you point to some examples maybe where you feel like the current administration maybe hasn't done that, hasn't made those difficult decisions, and sort of give us an insight into your mind on how you would have maybe dealt with those issues differently?
I think there's so many that we could go into. The one that sticks out is obviously with the abattoir. That's the main one that I know about, and I'm not going to say I've got all the answers. I don't. Anybody that knows anything about my background, I was on the board of the directors for a short period. It seems like about 4 or 5 years ago, but it was a lot longer than that. And there was decisions that were made then that were done by government that weren't in the best interests, and they were voiced, and they were told about it. And I don't think they did what was best for the interest of the island and for the public. But they didn't want to have that conversation because it was uncomfortable. And I said, that's probably the best one I can give you that I personally know about. There's obviously the other ones that go in on the paper that we all know about every day. We've got the steam packet. We've got the ongoing one with the wind turbines and everything else. We could go on forever about it, but I had one specific question from someone the other day, and they were saying, what was my view on an independent inquiry going on into the King Gaming incident? And I sat there and I thought about it for a second. And in reality, whenever anybody says anything to me about inquiry now, all I go back to in my head is probably the first one that I took any attention to, which was the Mount Murray inquiry. And they did the investigation. It cost a lot of money. And what did it really gain? It didn't really gain very much. So lessons were learned, and we won't do it again. But I'm more of a believer, again, in the practical side. And I think at the moment, especially with the elections coming up, we've got the opportunity to really make change. And if you get those people that maybe didn't do things that you said they were going to do and didn't do things that they were going to do it, rather than have an inquiry about it and maybe go forward and say, well, the lessons we learned, we just change the part. It's like I said to someone the other day, they were on about a similar thing. I went, well, whenever you go anywhere, whether it be a restaurant, whether you use a tradesman, whether you go to a solicitor's, all these other aspects in life, whenever you say to them, oh, I use them, or I did this, or they would, the first question anybody says, oh, would you use them again? And I think, well, why is that any different within this industry? Why is it different in any aspect? You go in and say, did they do what they said they were going to do? Did they come in on budget? Did they do not? If they didn't, well, would you use them again in any other trade?
So, when it comes to difficult decisions, the big one that we always look round to, because everything kind of comes back to, is the economy, whether it be a taxation or a minimum wage conversation. Lots of big topics through this current administration there. And a lot of it then comes down to money and whether it's that people are going to be taxed more, and that would be, unpopular. And so when you say that you're happy to make these difficult decisions, are you also then, able to take any critique you may get from constituents who might not be happy with the difficult decisions as well?
I've had critique since the day I was born. There's an awful lot of people that don't agree with half the things I do. So yeah, critique. I think, to be perfectly honest, you don't grow without critique. If you don't take it and you just expect everybody to go along with you, when you actually finally get something that doesn't go your way, you then don't have the ability to listen and learn from it. Every single day in my industry, in every industry I've ever worked in, I got told I was doing something wrong. And at the end of the day, you have to then learn from it and work through it. You said that you're on about the taxation. Yeah. I think in that respect, the first thing we have to do is, again, get back to the budget to find out where it's coming from, because it's not fair to keep squeezing people. It isn't. And when you start living somewhere and it comes down to, everybody goes on about wages and this, it all comes down to the cost of living. And if we can bring that cost of living down, then the money goes further. So people then, the wages aren't such a big issue, the taxes aren't such a big issue. So as far as I'm concerned, it's that first initial step of bringing that costing down and working out where we can do. And again, you go on about the people go, the biggest question is the size of the government. What are we going to do about that? And that one is a very difficult one, because obviously half of those people in there are taxpayers. they're the same people that are turning around saying, well, hang on a minute, those wages are paying I'm paying my taxes the same as everything else. So I think the biggest issue there and the biggest challenge for anybody is firstly to go in and see what waste we can get rid of. And I'm not on about people. I'm on about government overspend on so many things. They overspend on buying bits here, bits there, and stuff that's never used. So firstly, and that comes back from the farming side, we've gone through the last 20 years of a, so we'd say, depression, hard times, whatever. And I remember one of the first conversations I had with someone senior in government, and they turned around and said to me, oh, son, you need to learn to tighten your belt. And that is a saying that stuck with me in my entire life. And I think maybe it's time that we turned it back round and said, well, you need to tighten your belt.
And you talk about some of the economic issues. You sort of oppose that higher taxation. You speak about VAT, which obviously with your background in hospitality, there's a whole conversation around that. Yeah. But you support things like 0 hours contracts, which is a whole other discussion when it comes to minimum wage. How do you sort of envision being able to tackle that balancing act of all these different factors if you do get in?
With great difficulty, I suppose. You're never going to keep everybody happy. And that's the reality of what the nature of the beast in politics, isn't it? But again, I sometimes do well to keep all the people in my household happy. So I'm used to that. And I think it's something that's continuously evolving, and you have to keep your finger on the pulse. And that's why the way I have been within the industries I've been in, I've always tried to keep my finger on the pulse and doing everything, because when you start letting your finger off and you start letting people make decisions for you, then you tend to have decisions made that you wouldn't necessarily have approved or you wouldn't have put through. And then you've got to have accountability, because even when that happens, I then got to say, okay, well, I let that person make the decision. It's the same way as with the hospitality side, with the alcohol licenses. We now have to have a designated official or a designated person on site for every hour that we're open. And even if they make a mistake, it comes down on me, even if I'm not there. And I think that's what's lacking within government, because yes, the civil servants make a lot of decisions, but the MHKs also make the decisions, and the ministers, and they've all got to sit there and go, the buck stops here. And that's one thing that I bring from my past. I've had nobody to blame. I've had nobody that I can turn around and say, well, actually they did this, they did that. Yeah, they did, but in reality, it's me that's affected, so I have to have that accountability, and that's what I bring forward with it.
There are kind of undoubtedly many challenges coming up and big topics that the next administration is going to have to deal with. We could reel off a whole load of them.
We could be here all day.
We could. We had a lot of big things in this administration, the likes of assisted dying, the wind farm, which I'm sure we will get to. We also have, not least, the upcoming Moneyval evaluation that's later this year. Do you feel that you understand what that process entails, and are you confident at the moment in the island's ability to pass that inspection?
I'll be honest, it's an area that I don't know a great deal about, but it's an area that in the last week I've had some people that do know an awful lot about it, and some very, very intelligent people that are high up in the finance sector give me some really sort of in-depth lessons quite quickly. And I think about 2 days ago I had probably an hour's conversation with a gentleman who knew more than I think anybody that I've spoken to about it in the last 10 years. And he seemed fairly confident that, from his background, that yes, the island could pass it, but it depends on if they want to make an example of us. And I don't think anybody can say yes or no, that's going to happen, or no, it's not, because it all depends on factors that are out of our control. So we then again just have to try and ride that out and do the best we can with it. But from what he seemed to think, and it's an area that obviously I would look into. I want to try and get an understanding and a grasp of all areas. I'm not coming in saying I've got all the answers, because I haven't. I've got a variety of backgrounds that I know quite a lot about it, but there's other aspects that I'm not. But there's an awful lot of people that I would be going to ask the questions and get the answers that I need to then make the decisions.
And there are, like I say, a lot of big topics in this election. The not least, probably the biggest topic of conversation is wind farms, whether it be the offshore proposals or the onshore proposals, which obviously, given your constituency, it's kind of in your back garden. Mm-hmm. So what's your stance on those projects?
What's my stance on the wind farms? Obviously, with everything that's going on at the moment, we're all being told that, the candidates are being hushed up and told they can't say anything, they can't do this, they can't do that. And That's not entirely true. My understanding of it is we can say what we like, but then again, there's consequences to our actions. And if we turn around and say that they're the best thing since sliced bread and they should definitely go ahead, or that it's the devil's work and nobody should go anywhere near them, well, we're then losing our chance to vote on them at any point. So my view is I have to be selective in what I say, because obviously I think my real duty is to the people that if they want to elect me, vote for me, and I have to leave myself in a position where I can genuinely still vote for them and have a say in what's going forward. But my personal view on them, again, because I think I'm probably about the third or fourth closest house to where they're going to put them. And if I was to say, I think they're the worst thing ever, I don't think they should be there, and they say, well, it's because you don't want them in your backyard. But again, if they turn around and say, well, we're going to give everybody in the Isle of Man free electricity for 30 years, I'd be a hypocrite if I said I didn't like them, because I'm sat here saying I won't vote for me. I want to make the island a better place. So it's a tough one. And I think, they're an option. Are they the right option? I don't know. Because again, there's too many unanswered questions. There's too many ifs, buts and maybes. And there's too many people trying to force their opinions, push their views, and half of the information we're getting isn't right. And that's on both sides. So my view is I think they potentially have a place. Whether or not they are the right size, whether or not they're the right ones, whether the location is right, I don't know. But I think we have to look forward to some sort of renewable energies. My only question is, even with the turbines or the solar panels, they're sold to us as energy security for the future. But they're weather dependent. And in that same sentence, they'll turn around and tell us that the reason we need them is because climate change is going to make our weather more unpredictable. So where's the security aspect come from there? My view is the only thing that's never really changed or never faltered since the day I was born, since the day you were born, since the day that I imagine anybody listening to this was born, is that little bit of water behind us. It comes in every day and it goes out every day. So my view would be, I think, yes, the turbines are potentially an option. I don't know enough about them yet to make a decision either way if they're a good idea or a bad idea. But I would really like to see every possible bit of information put forward for the idea of tidal before we make any decision on that.
I'm wary of time here, so I want to sort of look to the specific fact that you're standing in Arbory, Castletown and Malew. So there's, a lot of specific issues and things I'm sure that people on doorstep are raising to you.
Oh, yes.
Not least, the Castle Rushen High School project, the parking around Arbory School, the age of Ballasalla School. I've got a whole list here in front of me. We could go into any of them. What are kind of the top priorities that you would want to tackle representing that area as an MHK?
As an MHK, I'm going to sit there and say all of them. But obviously, everybody's views and everybody's thoughts are important. But again, it comes down to money. And I think we need to look at the bigger aspects for spending. And, then we need, if we can look at that and tackle that side of it, then we can put everybody's views forward and we can put everybody's ideas in. The schools need looking at. That's a no-brainer. I don't think they've changed much since I was there. And again, I like to think that's only 7 years ago, but it wasn't. The parking outside Arbory was terrible when I was there again. So I think there's definitely avenues we need to look down and do something that side. And if we can push that forward, I think it's way overdue. The Castle Rushen side of it, yes, again, it's way overdue, but I don't want to rush into it and then do something that we're, I should say, on this island well known for, having big white elephants. You look at the waste plant, you look at the abattoir. They're all these things that are put in forward with the best of intentions, and I think they're rushed through to try and keep people happy. But in reality, I think we need to spend a little bit of time and actually make sure they're done correctly and make sure they're serviceable and make sure they are what's right for the next generation. Because again, it's like everything. It's like the pensions, the wages, everything. It's not us that's going to be picking up the bill. We will be at the moment, but long term, it's not. It's our kids that are going to be picking it up. And if you turn around and said to anybody, what's the one thing you want to do in life? It's protect your kids. So we have to make sure it works going forward for them.
You know, another conversation around this election is the working relationship between the national and local governments. When we talk about Arbory, Castletown and Malew, a big topic recently has been pedestrianisation in Castletown Square, maybe the lack of kind of local businesses in there. How do you envision working with local governments like that on, when it comes to working as a national and local level together?
Carefully. That's literally the words there, carefully, isn't it? It's from experience at the hospitality side, trying to work with people is probably the hardest thing you're ever going to do, because again, with the farming side, with animals, you get different personalities, but they normally do what they want. With people, if you get two opposing personalities for no reason, you might want the same thing, but if they have a personality clash and you try and get the two of them around a table, that's not going to happen. Or they'll just turn around and know that that's the right thing they want to do, and for everybody in the room, but they'll just turn around and say no. So going back there, it's carefully, and as you know, and do it as quickly as I can, efficiently as I can, and try and basically keep everybody happy, which I know is never going to happen. But then just try and mediate and bring some sort of, I suppose, cement between the different blocks, because there's all these blocks, and it's like every aspect of government. I think they've all got fragmentation, they've all got aspects of brilliance, but there's no joined up thinking. And I think my job is to try and bring them together, and not look at every aspect and try and run every aspect, but it's putting the people in place that know that area and know that to backwards and forwards and what's needed, and bring them and give them the opportunity and the power to then make them decisions.
You talk about kind of trimming the fat in terms of maybe the likes of the civil service and things, but we also have a lot of jobs on the island that very publicly need filling. We have challenges with traffic control, the airport's again in your back garden down there in that constituency. How would you look towards tackling recruitment and bringing people over into these jobs that we undoubtedly need?
We're going to venture onto the area of immigration, aren't we? Oh dear. In reality, I think immigration is an inevitable thing going forward, because obviously I've got a young baby at the moment, and for the last however many years of my life, you carry on, you get almost sort of in your silo and you go forward and you don't think about anything else around you. You just assume there's people always going to be there, and you go to get something and it's there, and the person's in the hospital, the person's in the fire. All these jobs are there. And I asked the lady in the hospital, obviously when we were in there, I said, how many babies do you have a year? And she said, well, I think the average is about, give or take, about 500. And you go, okay, that's fine. I thought it'll be more than that. But then you sort of ask the question, well, what's the mortality rate? And they go on about 990 to 1,200 a year. So even if you keep every single young person on this island, which I think it's pretty common knowledge we're not doing at the moment, your island and the population is already decreasing. So we need to have these people brought in. We need to try and fill these areas and bring the right people in. And everybody goes on about immigration. I don't think immigration is the issue. It's integration. Integration is the word that needs to be the core of any plan going forward, to try and bring recruitment, to try and bring people. It's that whole idea of having growth is a necessity. But then having growth for just growth's sake is pointless, because all you're doing is straining the already strained resources. Anybody that wants to come to the island and then strengthen that island, then we welcome them with open arms. But anybody that's going to come to the island and strain it, then we need to be careful about how liberal we are allowing that.
Not to cut off, we could talk about a million different topics here. We are fast running out of time. You only have about a couple of minutes left. So finally, what would your message be to anyone in the constituency who is thinking of trusting you with their vote?
I'm a man that does what I say I'm going to do. I'm straight talking. I'm not your typical politician. I'm not even what you'd class as a traditional politician. And I think maybe what we've seen over the last 15, 20 years is all these people that we put in positions of authority and power and within government, they've all got the best of intentions and they come with good ideas, but they haven't necessarily got that background and grounding of how to get from that idea to reality. Well, every part of my life and my history has come with me doing jobs that needed me to get from A to B. It was the idea that was put there, but I had to make it happen. And that depended on people's safety, people's security. It depended on jobs getting finished on time. It depended on, people getting paid. And also, in the greater scheme of things, it also depended on people getting fed, because we've always been told, and I was always brought up, you need a lawyer, a solicitor, and a doctor maybe 2 or 3 times in a life or whatever. With a farmer, everybody needs them 3 times a day. Well, maybe it's time that I've been trusted with all these different things, and I want to go forward and make a real impact and a real change to try and improve the life of everybody on this island. And I want to make a start, and I can't do it from the sidelines. And I'm beginning to realise that if I can't get into the vehicle, I can't make a change.
That was Geoff Sutcliffe, who's standing for election in Arbory, Castletown and Malew. Also standing in the constituency on Thursday the 24th of September are Juan Christian, Steve Crowther, Mark Firth, Kirrie Jenkins, Jason Moorhouse and Abby Quirk. You can listen back to this interview along with all the others recorded as part of this series shortly after broadcast from your usual podcast provider. And if you want to know anything else about the general election, we've got everything you need to know on our dedicated election website, which you can find at manxradio.com.